outdoors hauling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
the
don't know
timing
how
is
they-
less than perfect.
you just have to
I pointed
call
out to them,
their
we
office.
expect getting-
So do you call the moon pit specifically or just call Hooker Creek?
It's called Hooker Creek and tell them where you
Reschedule.
live.
Well,
See
you
what they
mentioned
say.
it, but they're getting in 10, I think they'll do inspections.
Cause I don't know how often they
Yeah,
have
Jeff and.
a
Jeff and
loader
Todd
out
actually
there.
done pretty
Oh,
good.
gotcha. So it's not like full operating.
Oh, no,
Here's
it's,
where
no,
we're at.
it's,
Here's where
it's
we're
near
coming.
just a
Do you know
pit.
if Jerry's coming?
They do their mining out there and then they haul
What's that?
it.
I think he's still in Africa.
Oh, yes.
Oh, so they don't have any screens or,
No, well,
Yeah, I mean,
they'll bring screens out
It's
there, but they
clear.
don't,
or no, they're. probably-
it's not open to the public at all.
it's kind of per contract.
Or it's not a pot.
Yeah,
There's a tax on a stock pot.
Certainly.
pardon?
There's a tax on the stock pot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right? So
they're,
they crush what they need.
Yeah.
That's right.
They move it. and
that's
more of a-
exactly what they
Yeah.
do.
Has some questions about how they interface it. Since all transition from.
The government figures out how to get their money
Yeah, they do.
into everything.
Yeah, I also.
No, besides, you would, even if there wasn't a tax, you wouldn't want to put all that money into stockpiling anyhow.
Area A, what we call area A. they don't-
If only we had a city.
Kind of pilot for.
I don't know, sometimes be careful what you wish for. I tell you, when I was in Marin's Sisters, oh my God.
Well, I'm so glad
Little
that.
towns or something.
Yeah, especially if it was on-
Govern, and the problem is getting volunteers.
Okay.
You've got to be able, you've got to have a planning commission, you've got to have a budget committee and
No,
a city
not at
council,
all.
and it's like,
Yikes.
wow,
not.
where are we gonna get all these people?
Yeah, I don't even know if there's enough people to supply the needs that, you know, it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, it definitely. I'm glad it fell through.
yeah.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Access to knowledge, safer city.
Well, and you know, the thing is, once you declare a city, there's certain standards.
There are, there are legal standards.
For infrastructure and stuff like that, and so how are you gonna? How are you gonna get like 70 people to, you know, I mean,
It is.
just running power alone, it would be, you know, prohibitively.
It was
Yeah.
absurd.
So today,
concepts, in my personal opinion. Now, where's the land?
It'll be home.
10 minutes.
Moon pit.
Yes, yes. I also, I did.
Remind me of your name.
Linda Swearingen.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
It's
it's
just
just
like-
like.
What's your name?
I've seen
Yeah.
it.
Right,
Don't want to
okay.
speak for them, but
Okay.
So I'm the better of the two.
No, it's not.
Yeah, hopefully the other Steve Brett can go today also.
I don't know.
He's pretty good about making these meetings.
I like it.
Yes, he has.
Yeah, he's had
those in the curbside.
Right.
The side there.
Yeah, that's I heard, right,
Yeah. Yeah.
Hard to get any support from the community.
Okay.
It's gotta be like, you know, so. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Morning. 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 Friday. Okay.
How are you? Good.
Down away from.
I was good. Yeah, good.
It's
Morning, how's it going? Good, how are you?
Like,
Great. Excellent.
Good, Paul's already there.
Information to share. Oh, good.
You had, it was always fun. Transfer trucks and everything going up. Horse Ridge.
We're gonna give it about
Both directions.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
More personal, but walk.
Oh, let's see what they have.
Yeah. Memorizing everything out at times. It's been windy lately. Windsock got all torn out, so I took it down. I got the one on the short pole still.
Oh, yeah.
By the house.
And they're all the games.
Yeah.
You know,
Catching some rats out there.
Color palette.
And overnight. branch route.
Yeah.
Mandate. Ohio
So it's
State.
hard, you know, it's like out there. One thing I've learned that places where chipmunks just don't want to be ones, is what, there are places where chipmunks don't go.
Oh, yeah.
They don't love you.
Yeah.
That's, sometimes do that. And kind of a rat, I said it between my smart phone wires in my.
Yeah.
Allowed to replace the wires.
Throw
Put
it.
a trap on it, motor away. The next day, I had that rat in the trap. And
Yeah.
it was extremely
You
gratifying.
take Sandy Ann or
$50
That's
rat.
great. We're just listening out there overnight. Driving and flies way around.
Oh, sure.
We lost it, we don't have the dogs.
Any problems?
Choose our lights. Witnesses.
Yeah.
Leaving my car out there.
You just sit down, you know,
Starting on Highway 97.
Because that really helps, right? It's really nice to have a fair bit the hood and blood over the windshield or something.
I see Nathan's hood up.
All right, well, good morning. I think we have enough people to get the meeting going. So welcome. So what number meeting is this for us? Anybody keeping count? Still counting. Yeah. Good question. So welcome to our October meeting. So the first thing I'll do is do roll calls so that make sure we have forms so that the meeting goes. Safety here, Paul Battagna. Jared Black. Here. Luke Dines. Ed Finch or John Roberts. Keith Caceres. Here. Cassie Lacey or Robin Jones as alternate.
Robin Jones.
Thank you, Robin. Erica Lindberg. Chris Ogren,
Ogren here.
Mike Riley,
Here.
Erwin Sweatman,
Present.
Robin Bora. And that makes 6, so we have quorum. So.
Just barely.
All right, so the agenda is let me pull up the screen share. Second. Great. Okay, so someone move the agenda for approval. I move approval of the agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved by Mike Riley, seconded by Keith. Any discussion or modifications? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Passes. Movement of the minutes. Do people have those in front of them or no? Yeah. Maybe two. Is there a motion to approve? I move approval of the minutes. Moved by Mike, a second. A second. Seconded by Erwin. Any comments? Hearing none. All in favor of approval of the minutes? Aye. Aye. Aye.
Hi.
Minutes are approved. Okay, so few things we want to go over today. One is kind of an update on what's been going on in terms of outreach and community input. Probably the biggest event that we've done over the last couple of months was an open house that occurred on September 11th. We've also been doing a number of other meetings. We had a meeting with the county puts on educational informational series for residents. There are about 22 people who came to the solid waste department update in what's called County College. Learn around about all the different activities and departments within the county. We did an update, joint meeting of the Board of County Commissioners and City Council and Sisters. We've also done the same in the city of Bend. We will be doing another one tonight in the city of Redmond, just to give them all an update. We met with Oregon Natural Desert Association at the end of last month and had a meeting earlier this month with Bureau of Land Management. So those were the most significant discussions and conversations we've had since we last met. So in regards to the open house, we went through a number of things. We obviously went through the landfill siting process. I'll touch on that in a moment. We also gave a bit of an overview of some of the other activities that the solid waste department is doing, and we've been using other means to do that as well. Press releases. We had a good bit of press coverage for all the local channels about the open house to get people to attend. We had 36 people in the room and 11 virtual, so close to 50 during the course of the evening. And so I'll give you guys a bit of an overview if you weren't able to attend. First, we kind of touched on some of the other activities that the solid waste department is working on. So that in addition to landfilling materials, we also are trying to divert materials through recycling, composting, waste reduction work. The goal has established, the state has established a goal for Deschutes County of a diversion rate of 45% or greater. We're currently at a rate hovering around 30%. So in order for the county to meet some of those diversion goals, which will also assist in extending the life of any landfill we currently operate and operate in the future. We're going to have to make some additional investments in infrastructure here. And some of the things we're looking at here at the Not Landfill campus, we're looking at potentially developing in that pink section or red section marked A and B. Pretty large building. It might be as large as 100,000 square feet, 120,000 square feet. To do the processing of construction and demolition debris in part of that building, and the processing of commingled recyclable materials that are collected curbside and at businesses and multifamily residents. The actual separation and marketing of that material. Between those two activities, plus on the right, you'll see the development of expanding our composting activities. We're only able to compost about 50% of the organic material that's collected in the county through the fire-free programs and at our various transfer sites. All of that organic material that's collected, the woody debris, is currently not composted because our site is too small for that. So we're looking at developing a much larger facility that has the ability to process up to 50,000 tons of material a year. We're looking at Negus or other locations as potential sites for that activity. Between those three expansions and development of infrastructure, we think we could hit at least 45% diversion of our stream. So we're in the process of actually taking these conceptual designs and actually trying to run. All right, what is the impact of the capital costs for this, which will exceed $30 million, probably closer to upwards of up to $50 million. How would that be financed and how would it impact our ratepayers to develop all this infrastructure and activities? The other thing we talked about before we got into the landfill siting was what's going to happen to the not landfill when it's being closed. And historically, we've looked at it as potentially a passive park space. It's undevelopable, developable. You can't build structures on it, or if you did, you'd have to go all the way down to the base rock below, and you have a line there, so it could be problematic. So we've looked at having passive park use or along those lines. We met with the Parks Department. They have some interest in seeing how they might intersect with this. They bought the Rose property across Rickard Road from us, over 400 acres there, for the development of parks in the future. So this might be an avenue to help people get from the north down to that park. But we've also, we're actually meeting today with a group looking at the possibility of developing solar recovery, solar energy development there. So we are starting to look at what is that facility going to be used for? Is it going to create energy and potentially be a revenue stream for the county? Is it going to be passive park use, or is it going to be some combination of the two? And as we've stated all along, the not landfill will continue, or the not landfill site will continue to work as and serve as a transfer station for any future landfill. Future landfill will be a limited access for aggregated waste, so the not landfill complex will still handle 700 vehicles a day coming in for recycling and waste disposal. So then we got into the whole process of what we've been doing here with the SWAC and parametrics and staff. And this is a list of the types of questions that we were getting from the public as we kind of explained how we were moving this process forward. Parametrics have put together a number of different poster boards that showed the process and how we got to the two sites we have, as well as some renderings of what these sites might look like when during the process as they're developed, but also when 100, 200, 300 years down the road when they're sections of it are closed. Some people are asking how long will it last, and we said to design it for over 100 years, and I expect it to last much longer than that. They're asking around recycling, how the transfer stations be used, what happens if the facility can't be permitted. So there are questions as to what are we doing in regards to alternatives. What's the timeline for the BLM sites? Could not be expanded instead. Spoke to the fact that we are not looking at. We have height restrictions under our current permit. Even if we could go up much higher, it wouldn't extend it a significant amount of time. It would buy us time, but it wouldn't be a long-term solution. Are we working with other counties? How much will the facility cost and who will pay? How much does the county invest in diversion? And are there cost savings from reaching the 45% diversion goal? So the first part of the evening kind of presentation helped develop some further discussion. So that was the event in short, and I'm happy to take any questions or expand a little further any questions you might have.
Good meeting.
Yeah, yes. It's good. Yeah, it helped us develop enough, some information that'll help with any future kind of discussions with the public and press or groups that are interested. So in terms of our timeline, as we said, we met with Ben, we're meeting with City Council of Redmond tonight and La Pine early next month. We're continuing to talk with interested parties, whether they come to us or we reach out to them. And we'll kind of touch on what's the timeline, but our next meeting is in January. Is that correct? Yeah, and at that meeting, we're going to be bringing the preliminary results, full preliminary results of what we're finding on the 2 sites.
Can that, for the future of not, it's still envisioned beyond the transfer station that there would also be composting going on here?
Yeah, we're trying to figure out, kind of depending on what we're able to do up at Negus or potentially some other site for composting. If we can have all the composting in one location, it would probably move off this site. However, it may be that we're gonna have to do kind of woody debris, non-putrescible composting elsewhere, and then putrescible, and by putrescible, I mean the compostables with food waste in them. It's possible that may have to continue here, so we may have to operate 2 different sites. But ideally, we'll have one site, one location. And if we can, closer up to the agricultural areas up a little farther north in the county. We would still operate though here as a transfer and grind site, for example, as well as Southwest, where the incoming material will be received, ground, and prepped for composting. And then set up. So we won't get rid of that compost permit.
In addition, we're also planning to meet with DEQ in November, when we have subtask reports ready and preliminary findings. To outline the next steps for permitting facility with DEQ.
But for this committee, those are the next 3 meetings, January, April, and May, then still.
Yeah.
Still third Tuesday. And nothing is scheduled after that, right?
So,
Yeah, thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll give a brief overview of some updates from the final site evaluations process. First off, I'd like to talk about the straggler site that we have still hanging on, the BLM site off of Highway 20, Horse Ridge Frontage Road near Stookie Road. And this one was, you may recall at the last SWAC meeting, it was held out of concern that the proposed city of Mountain View could stall the other 2 projects and put them at risk in their feasibility as potential sites. And so it was decided at that time to keep that BLM site, that 3rd and final one, as a potential backup site. But on September 27th, as you may have heard, the Board of Commissioners passed a motion denying the petition for incorporation of the proposed city of Mountain View. So that risk to the other sites, and this one as well, technically was in the boundary, although further out, that risk is now removed. And so,
Is there another way that the proponents of that, can go ahead through the legislature or some other way? Does the county commission is the last step, or?
I think they had an opportunity to appeal, but we have not heard that an appeal is moving forward.
in our discussions with BLM recently, they pointed out that although this isn't designated as a wilderness area, it has wilderness area characteristics with old growth juniper and wildflowers, etc. And there's an active grazing lease that crosses over the site area that was delineated, prevalent rock, so it'll be a costly site to develop and operate. likely have an extended timeline for potential acquisition and permitting. And it's not currently included in the final site evaluation, so to bring it up to the same level the other sites are at would be a bit of a lift. So it's in question whether it's really a viable site to continue considering. So staff is recommending removal of this site from further consideration.
Did you guys do any cost analysis on, I know the rock is super costly, there's a lot of rock out there, did you guys dig down deeper into that financial model and see what that cost would be to excavate that rock?
Not deeper than we did previously with the cost factor analysis.
Right.
We notice it's prevalent rock and then apply a factor to that, and it just kind of, it represents how that factor could influence costs, but we didn't get down to dollar figures. That would require preliminary site design, grading estimates, right? Blasting, crushing, etc.
But there's no need to do that if we're gonna eliminate it as an option. Yeah, makes sense.
So that we can have that in that, there's a section of the agenda for SWAC discussion. We can discuss this.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to address this one up front, as it's technically one of the sites that you'll see on the story map.
Can I say
But
one more thing about that?
Mhm.
And I can't remember, I think you answered this a couple of meetings ago, but there's that other gravel pit or some kind of pit. Not far from it,
the Horse Ridge Pit,
I don't know what the name is, but it's further up the old highway.
Yeah.
And that was on some other kind of ownership or not usable in any way.
Yeah, I think that was one of the original sites, I think maybe even part of the 33 sites.
Yeah.
Under consideration that there's a significant concern there about the amount of water. Basically, it's at the base of Horse Ridge. And so the water coming down there would comes directly into that mined out area, so you have to do a lot of work to try and alleviate that.
Was that geology similar in terms of a lot of rock there too, but they still somehow put that pit in there?
Tim, do you know much about that site?
So I think this site was more soil than rock.
Oh,
So that canyon, the soil for the decades or millennium filled in there, and I think the mining that goes on there now is for fill dirt. So it's not a hard rock, at least on the surface. I don't know how deep that fine grained soils go, but that's what it was being used for when we were considering it in the early 90s for a site.
thanks.
thank you. It was also small, it was
Yeah.
constrained, had a couple different property owners and some residences even nearby on Horse Ridge Frontage Road.
Okay, it sounds like the geology was different.
Yeah.
Temperature profile.
Yeah, so we'll take a look at some of the progress that's been made in the final site evaluations. These are just a few of the areas of study that we've been working on. Big one is the geophysical survey. And we'll have some preliminary results to share on that. Geotechnical investigations based on some of the anomalies seen in the geophysical survey and the transect taken across the sites. Where they took boreholes and did some test pits to get a hands-on look at those materials. Cultural resources field work was done at both sites. Natural resources field work was done at both sites in coordination with ODFW and use of their habitat quantification tools. Transportation on-site assessment, Philson went out there and looked at the access, the opportunities and potential locations for an access road. And connection to Highway 20. Water infrastructure assessment, looking at the wells on site. Had some folks go out and do water quality testing on the wells as well. And getting a sense of what their production rate is as well, and its feasibility as a water source. Both sites do have wells that might be able to be repurposed. The environmental assessment work on site, as well as an interview with the site representatives regarding the site's environmental history. And then preliminary site design and layout, which we'll share in a bit, with the layout of roads, cells, buildings and to give a picture of the facilities that will be on site. We'll also use that design then to generate development cost estimates and operational cost estimates. Also not noted here is community site assessment, which Huntsor's leading up, as well as a handful of other specific areas of study. We expect all of these reports to come back in late October, early November, as separate reports, and then we'll have the results to review with the county and also with DEQ, and then we'll have a couple months to collate all that information together in a cohesive report. So here's the preliminary design of Moon Pit, in which we show 3 separate phases of development. And cell, we removed the cells just for clarity, but have planned out new cells to be developed approximately every 3 years over the 100-year lifespan. And it is feasible with the site from our preliminary design to provide 100 years of disposal capacity, and that's with fairly conservative disposal rates as well.
Meaning higher.
Yeah, higher than they are now. You can see, you might be able to see some of the elements here. The site would include a new scales and scale house, an on-site stormwater pond to manage on-site runoff, perimeter ditches to manage off-site run-on, so water that would run onto the site. Berming for screening on the west and north side, the west being the most important there. The vacuum blower for collection of landfill gas and a flare, but also have long-term plans for a renewable energy facility and a substation in connection to the grid. Office and maintenance buildings. And a perimeter road, and what you can see there, perhaps, it's a little bit far out, but those dashed purple lines represent leachate collection lines that serve as under drains for each landfill area, which would consist of multiple cells to collect leachate and then pump it out and then recirculate it. So it reduces the amount of buildup of leachate on the liner and the risk of it breaking through.
With what cells?
That's in each, you can kind of see the purple lines running east-west. Those are to collect
Oh, I
leachate
see them.
from the bottom of the landfill.
Those are these. Okay.
Yeah, and the colors there represent them, or they're drawn at the, what we call the floor of the landfill, which is subgrade essentially. And that's how far down it would go. And the purpose of going down is, and what kind of determines that is how far down do we need to go to generate the materials needed for daily, intermediate, and final cover, as well as potential rock materials for the road, perimeter roads, and temporary cell access roads. And then from there, it goes up. The prominence here is approximately 150 feet to the lower cell in the northwest, or the lower phase in the northwest corner, from existing grade roughly near the entrance to the peak. And we're looking at the entire site and its capacity. But are in discussions with Hooker Creek about coexistence on the site, and there's the potential for mining to happen in different areas while landfilling is happening in another. Any questions on this?
So maybe you don't want to talk about this publicly, but is there any resolution to whether Hooker Creek is going to work with Hooker Creek?
So in terms of, do they want to sell it or?
Right.
So we've issued a letter of solicitation for proposals from both the Roth property owners and the Moon Pit site. And we've asked for at least 2 proposals for county ownership, and they can provide another alternate proposal as well, which we would assume that might be that they're leasing or something else, but we've asked for what it would it look like for county ownership. We're getting those proposals that to have those back by is November 6th. So for our January meeting, we'll have people that give a bit more. Evaluation of that.
Who's the property owners around the outside of that?
So I'll be alone.
Was there potential to expand outward if you chose to?
Potentially that, none of this is on their, is it zone 1 disposal list?
I think zone 3.
Zone 3 disposal list. This is all, because right to the west is the Badlands, and it's right adjacent to it. So they're interested in the protection of Badlands, the wilderness experience, so we don't anticipate that any land would be available down the road.
And in discussions with Hooker Creek, there may be opportunities to lower the floor to generate more material and then have more capacity. So there's opportunities for this to change or maybe go deeper, depending on whether mining and landfill operations and their objectives can align.
Because you're saying that the peak there in the upper left-hand corner of the map on the right is like a topo map of the future outline of the cells at closure.
At closure, correct.
And so that's about 100 feet above current grade, that I think there.
150 foot prominence up to the peak.
And looks like there is there 2 peaks, am I interpreting this correctly? There's another one that's sort of where the job goes.
I think there's just one right about here, but it kind of breaks grade. So this is going up at a 3-to-1 and then goes at about 5%, I believe, on the cap. And the renderings will give
Another peak down there.
yeah, there could be, I have to take a closer look.
Keep
I
going.
believe this is sloping down, but yeah, there may be,
Well, yeah, farther, right in there.
it functions kind of like a ridge line.
Yeah.
Those are existing peaks in there, Jim, or?
No, this would be proposed. So
This
this
will
is
be
the
when
final
you're
closure.
done.
Huh?
When the site is done, that's
Yeah.
what it'll look like.
That's the
Yeah,
final.
he's
grade.
got some renderings that he can show you.
Yeah, so this might help portray it a little more. This is just, this is an isometric view elevated from Horse Ridge Frontage Road and Highway 20. The junipers do a pretty good job of obscuring this more when you're at ground level view. But kind of gives a sense of the relationship of the site to Dry River Canyon. It's essentially one canyon over. And so there's this ridge that helps screen the site. The most prominent and protruding point would be the lower cell, but then cells after that kind of tuck back into the existing canyon there. This is rendering the site at full closure, final closure, and full development from the southwest. You can kind of see how it creates almost like a meandering ridge line. That would tuck back into the hillside and the drainage basin there.
So most of that wouldn't be seen from the highway 20, that little one spot, you can see it, just the very edge of it.
Yeah, this would likely be visible if you look for it. Should be looking off the road though, if you're driving.
Yeah.
But,
If you're a passenger.
You already got that existing ridge there, it protects most of it.
yeah, this ridge does quite a bit to hide, right, phase 2 and 3.
But that parking area, the access area into the Badlands, it'll be pretty apparent from that.
Right.
Okay.
I assume this is the view in 100 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
110.
Yeah, so I mean, for,
The actual highway 20 will
Yeah,
be the start point.
yeah, and even the initial cells, like a first cell that Jerry's designed, doesn't go to this full height. We often, and in this case, we'll likely have cells over the initial layer of cells to get to that final height. Because you can only stack up so high with a small area, which is identified roughly as this triangular area, is the first cell. And it'll go up to about 50% of this height, and same with the rest of the cells here. And then later, more cells will be placed or could be placed on top of that first layer. It's kind of an overfilling to get to that final height. So even with the first cell, the prominence wouldn't be 150 feet, maybe 75. So yeah, it'll take quite some time for this build out. So geophysical study survey wasn't done on Moonpig because it had already been done in 1996. And so we opted to utilize that data. The underlying conditions are the same. What's different is the surface elevation due to mining, lowering the ground surface in areas where it's been mined, and maybe a minimal amount of sand blowing in some areas and depositing in lower pockets and hillsides. So so we utilize this. So this is a bit historic, I suppose, but it provides good information. And the same geophysical firm, Siemens and Associates, did this as with Rockies. So same sub-consultant on board for this work. And so so you can see here, there's 3 transects taken of the site, A, B, and C. And then we'll now look at the cross section of those views. And what you can see at the bottom with the cross hatching is essentially bedrock. And up to that point, or above that, is a variety of materials: sand with silt, gravel with sand, some cobbles, sand with fine gravel, trace silt, and then this hard line here is basalt. So there's roughly 10 to 30 feet of loose material before you hit the hard pan of basalt that's underlaid. And really the geologic history is kind of interesting here in that this is essentially an alluvial fan from Dry River Canyon. So as a lake that was where Milliken is now spilled through here, it deposited gravel, sand, rock kind of in this region as it kind of fans out through here. And so this lower portion had a ground deposit, which is easy to mine and use. And so it's a little history of the site, but that's 10 to 30 feet deep, and then you're in the hard rock. So there's some benefit to that loose material and easy digging, but beyond that point, blasting would be required.
Doesn't that the existing site go down like 100 feet at the lowest point?
I think about 80
80.
is where they've gone down to.
So they had to blast to get down.
Yes. This is still here, actually. I think we might have driven into this one for the site visit, and we could see exposed spaces of hard basalt rock right down.
One question to add on your renderings here of the post closure, over 100 years from now. Wasn't the intent though, with Hooker Creek, is they wanted to keep that as a mining operation for years and years to come, so a portion of that property would still be mined? Or is that, could this look like the whole area would be encapsulated, but I thought they were planning on wanting to mine it.
Yeah, I think it's, that's what we're gonna be waiting to hear back on. They're taking a look at, so we met with them probably 3 weeks ago, maybe. With this concept for them and their folks to take a look at and say, is this, this is our concept, this is the kind of the easiest way for us to lay out a landfill on the site with the least amount of digging or expense to get down to a depth. They're gonna look at it relative to what they think their business need is, and they'll probably come back and say, you know what, in this section here, the phase 1, let's go deeper, and that'll give them more time to work and elsewhere on the site. We don't know, it's for them to kind of come back now and take this design.
How deep do you need to go for the landfill?
Really, only you need to go as deep as the materials you can harvest. About 20% of a landfill is not garbage, it's dirt and rock for making roads and doing daily cover, etc. So about 20% of the fill is actually materials that you want to harvest off of that site. So the landfill design is based on what is the need over 100 years for fill cover material and site use material. So that's why they bring it down to, I think it's roughly 50 feet thereabouts is the need on this site.
Would that be all phases will go down 50 feet?
I think it may vary a little bit based on the topography of the site
And the leachate
and the
lies, it has to slope down.
Yeah, everything is done so that it drains to where roughly where you saw that pond, which is a stormwater pond, that's the low point of the site.
So there's there's a side slope requirement, 3 to 1. So depending on how large your hole is, you could reach a point, a depth that you can't go any deeper in order to
Yeah.
maintain 3 to 1 slope. So there's a restriction there as well, but given the size of the property we're looking at, you're not likely to, you might run into that in that little
Mhm.
S curve there in the site.
Yep.
A depth restriction just because of the side slopes.
Right, yeah. But those bigger squares, so to speak, do offer that opportunity if Hooker Creek wants more of that material. Could consolidate to maybe 2 leachate lines or 1 in the middle. And then go at that 3 to 1 slope. But yeah, that would be the limitation. Ultimately, and in terms of those 2 operations, ideally, the mining happens first. They get the material out, and that also provides that airspace for the cells, and then the landfilling happens as a reclamation activity for the mining operation itself. So it's not meant to displace mining operations, but essentially happen after.
So they would be, if they come back with a proposal, they would be proposing a timeline within which they could mine and the landfill could go into.
Yeah, they may partition the site, what to partition the site, they may, we don't know exactly what it'll look like, that the challenge will be. The permitting if you try and split the site, so. Ideally, we want to get the whole site permitted at one time, at least the whole area that's going to be filled permitted.
So the final contours that you showed there, utilizing all the acreage of the site. Is that all required to reach 100 years of capacity?
Yeah, it might have been a little bit longer, might have been 120 years, but I think it was right in the 100-year.
Yeah, so you can kind of see a similar trend, undulating terrain, and we'll use our drone survey to update that ground surface, see where it might have changed on this. It does look hand drawn, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, generally what we are aiming to show here is just the materials overlaying on the bedrock. And you see, this is transect C. And at that right end, it starts to, swing up onto basalt. And there's kind of that pocket where the looser fine grained soils have deposited. And C is kind of that high end on the south end of the site. So yeah, there's a limited area where there's easy digging essentially, which is in that lower area where there were the alluvial deposits from the Dry River. And so in the upper mining area, landfill phase 3 in the southeast corner, we didn't have geophysical survey done there, but this is an active mining area that we visited with the geophysics and geotechnical subs, and we could clearly see the exposed spaces indicate rock prevalence fairly shallow. So a lot of blasting and crushing to make that area to develop a landfill in that area. And presumably phases 2 as well. As we see how the deposits kind of go away once you get to the edge of that lower region. So yeah, it's generally characterized by 10 to 30 foot deep deposits of gravel, sand, and silt over basalt bedrock. Landfill would need to go 40 to 60 feet deep. Present day ground surface slightly differs, so we'll update that. The drone survey. Shallow bedrock was observed in upper east of the site, landfill phases 2 and 3. Rock blasting and crushing will be required for development of the site and reuse of materials for solid waste management facility needs. The county and the project team is coordinating with Hooker Creek on the potential shared use of the site and the synergy between landfill and aggregate mining operations. So more to come on that. So Roth East. You can see that the shape of the site is very favorable for higher capacity. Initially, our landfill engineer, Jerry Friesen, was able to show that the site could have 200 years of capacity.
let me add one thing here. So this is in context. So that site is 1,700 acres roughly. This is around 350 acres thereabouts.
Oh, in terms of, yeah,
Yeah, where it is. So this is kind of the farthest, the south area of that property, so farthest away from Highway 20. There's kind of a ridge line up in there, a small little basin.
Mhm.
In
And-
essence.
property continues to the south.
Yeah.
What's shown as property lines on the top and bottom are actually not property lines, they're just kind of constraints for the site development.
Yeah.
But the site continues to the south and continues to the north all the way to Highway 20.
So to make sure, the site to be developed would be 350 acres,
Yeah.
but overall 1,700.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that quadrant's roughly 640, it's a section. The size of a section.
Yeah.
It's split between two sections, but.
How big is the moon pit?
Well, the property is 445 acres. And I believe the developed area is just under 400, yeah.
385, something like that.
So this with those setbacks, given that there's private on the west, which is Rock West. And then east, which is another private rancher, given 500 feet from the property boundary on any side really. For the development of the site, so coming in is maybe around 450 acres.
When we had that field trip, where we kind of stopped and walked around a little bit.
Yeah, so you remember this ridge line? There's kind of this pocket. Right about here,
Where was that wood structure?
Yeah,
right about here.
Right. there.
okay. So to the south is going up Pine Mountain.
Yeah. Yeah, and so similar to the other one,
Power lines are off.
that's great.
Off to the right there, right?
Yeah. Power lines up here, yeah.
So the most visible part from Highway 20 would be what you call phase 2 and 4, the further up.
I mean, this is the area of greatest prominence.
Okay,
Believe
right there.
Altogether, it's 150 to 200 feet from here to this peak. And you'll see from the renderings, that'll show in a second, it kind of gives an idea of, how it might look. But the layout for this one's much simpler than Moon Pit, as you can see, just 4 leachate lines, 4 bases. Access road through here, looking primarily at a new access road and connection to Highway 20. Going up this northern stretch on the property. Scale house, office, maintenance building, substation, renewable energy facility, vacuum blower for pulling the landfill gas flare. And then the landfill gas condensate sump. Stormwater pond for on-site management, and then perimeter ditching for off-site runoff. So yeah, a very favorable shape for landfill development. Here's an idea of how that would look, and this is, we brought down the design life to 125 years, basically shorten the facility. It technically could go higher. You can see there's a big flat area up top where it's at 5%. If this slope were to continue at 3 to 1, you get quite a bit higher. But you brought it down to show more of a similar comparison in terms of life to Moon Pit. This is at 125 years of life. And so the prominence here is a little lower than it would be if it were 200 years. So this is an isometric view of Highway 20 and New Morris Road. So this would be, northeast of the site. Ground level view from Pine Mountain Road. This ridge line, once you get about here, right next to this ridge line as it goes up the canyon per se, or the valley, it starts to disappear. But once you're on the open road, just after Highway 20, it would be seen to the left. And from what I've seen on through this model from the launch pad, it's not visible. At least
From that peak there. for
Yeah.
Paragliding.
from the paragliding.
Oh, from the summit.
From the summit, on the near Pine Mountain Observatory, which they're positioned on the south side of the mountain, which is good. For shielding of the site, but if you walk to the peak, and we have another rendering that we shared at the open house that shows that. From the peak, you can see it right through this, kind of break in the ridge line, which is actually, it has a lot to do with the soils that we see on site, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, there's that kind of break in the ridge line, and it could be seen through there. You know, if you were to walk to the peak of Pine Mountain near the observatory.
So when paragliders come off that top, do they go to this area?
Only when they are flying towards Burns or Brothers. Generally, we stay over the northwest side of the mountain. There's also a southeast side, but I don't believe it would be visible from there or even while flying. You know, once you get high enough, it doesn't really matter whether you're, you know, if you're 2,000 feet over the summit, the actual summit, not where the observatory is, you're gonna see, you see Polina Peak, you see everything.
Yeah,
Sure. Brothers is clearly visible, you know, it's gonna be very visible. I think it'd probably be pretty visible on the flight path for Van Redmond Airport and when planes come in. I thought that the ridgeline would better protect it from Highway 20 view, but it looks like from the observatory road that it's gonna be pretty visible.
From Pine Mountain Road.
And is this vantage point right at Pine Mountain Road and Highway 20, or are we up past the first cattle guard at this point?
Pretty much just past the cow guard.
Okay,
But the paragliders don't very often land in that area.
only when you bomb out, you know, the intent is to fly further east, but if you don't make it, people do land there. I flew to Brothers the other day and a couple of guys with me landed right in that area between the ridge and the power line, which is pretty much right there. You would expect that with the activity there would be better thermals and people would be less likely to bomb out. But there is the potential you would have paragliders landing in, you know, open operation pit, which probably would be less than great. I assume trash is a pretty soft landing.
Unless it's in front of a big machine.
Yeah, so that's a view from Pine Mountain Road. This is a view from the northeast. And you can kind of see through here is where there's that break in the ridge line. And I believe the observatory is on one of these peaks.
Yeah, that peak to the right is the actual summit that we launch off of.
This one?
That one, yeah. And so this would be like the view from Newton.
Yeah, power lines.
The elevated view from Newton.
Yeah. View from the east. So also from New Morris Road, perhaps if you're above there. Looking this way, Pine Mountain Road, it goes through here and then winds behind that ridge line. And isometric view from the north. And so this kind of the prominence from the existing grade up, this berm, and then the ultimate fill up here is what makes this visible. Oh, actually, see that right? This is from the north. So yeah, back corner. So we did a geophysical study at Rock, see what's going on underground. And that was the first step. They run these transects across the ground and then can detect the character of the materials, I guess the velocity of the seismic wave can help indicate the hardness of the material. And so generally, once you get around cyan, that starts to mean rock or broken rock at least, and then red is hard basalt, hard pan. And so based on the geophysical results, the geotechnical firm Dell identified several points to investigate further with borings. So B1 is here, see what this might be. And then this lighter material here is presumed to be soft. And so they wanted to see what that was. And then this area as well, another soft spot to look at. And you see the depth here. This is this 200-foot threshold is well within what the landfill excavation would be. Generally the first 100. So Kind of checking out that first 100 to 150 feet is really informative for what site excavation might look like for cell development, as well as perhaps the underlying materials for groundwater protection. So borings, those 3 borings reveal the predominant presence of gravel, sand, silt, and cobbles within 100 to 150 feet below ground. So consistent with what we see here, hard pan was not encountered. They didn't encounter refusal, or the boring rig just essentially stops. And so it likely does exist near this depth of 400 feet or so beneath the surface.
You really never need to go that deep anyway.
Wasn't nowhere near it. So, long story short, the geophysical and geotechnical results indicate easy digging at the site and a favorable variety of material for needs on site. There's a drainage layer, which is drain rock. The daily cover, which is more fine grained material for covering refuse at the end of each day. Intermediate cover covering cells that will then be filled over by a subsequent cell, and then final cover for the top, the roads. And so on-site crushing and processing is anticipated to repurpose these materials, but blasting is not anticipated at this site. So very, very favorable materials seen at this site.
What's a big cost savings as well, not having blast, or potentially.
Big time. And just a quick background, our geotechnical engineer or geologist was thrilled to explain this to us and how this works. And his theory is that essentially this pocket here in the ridgeline was historically the outlet of what was. And I'm not a geologist, so I'll try my best to convey this just because it's interesting. But there's an enclosure here where currently the road goes up Pine Mountain. That was closed off and material was then getting pushed through. Perhaps it was a caldera or some sort of lake. But there was drainage from that whole basin, the pocket up by Pine Mountain, through this break in the ridgeline. And then this created what they call an alluvial fan. And you can kind of see from the surface elevation how that looks. You can see how it kind of fans out like this. And material was deposited through that break in the ridgeline until another break formed where the road is now. And that became the predominant channel. And he wrote it further and further down. And then this was essentially decommissioned as an outlet for the upstream material, because to produce all this, it needs a much larger drainage basin than it has just up to this ridge line. So it's upstream rock and sediment from Pine Mountain historically flowed through here until another way out was formed. So some interesting history there. Essentially both sites have that in common as places where there was an alluvial fan, but what we see here is this is much deeper than Moon Pit with those soft fine grained materials. Any questions on that?
Was there any indication about the water table? The depth of, is that going to be below the bedrock or?
We haven't done borings that deep to confirm. The best information we'll have at this phase is well logs and information from the existing well. We did take a look on site at Deep Well, which is at the mobile home up off of Pine Mountain Road. And I believe that's near 800 feet deep. Granted, that's a higher elevation to begin with at the ground level. But
I think the wells farther down the hill were 560 or thereabouts.
so maybe that water's sitting on top of this level, which is about 400 feet, or there may be a water bearing zone underneath. But that's a great question, and we'll have more information as those reports are finalized. They're specifically looking at that, how deep is groundwater, based on the information we have.
Does it add to or detract from the integrity of the landfill and its liner to have that bedrock closer to the liner or a soft material under the liner, or what would you prefer as an operator? For, the best integrity?
I think we'll have to talk to the geotech guys to see how soft it is down on the bottom. You don't need it to be hard pan, but you want to make sure that it's stable. So whether we would actually have to build a hard pan underneath it or that base, because how far down are they going about?
With the borings, 100 to 100.
No, in terms of the design, no,
Oh, I believe we're
60 feet. or
Yeah.
something.
roughly, yeah.
One thing I would add to that is that this is fairly well consolidated material. It's not cemented, but it's well consolidated. And so it's going to be a pretty firm foundation for any landfill on this site. It's not like being on the bedrock, but you don't necessarily, you always put a little bit of a soil layer over your bedrock anyway prior to building over it, with liners and all that. So it's actually it's a pretty good site from that standpoint with these materials.
When you have, say, basalt bedrock and placing a liner over that, it's critically important to have a good cushioning layer.
Yeah.
So there isn't any hard rock that can puncture it.
Yep.
Of the two sites, which one has the most prominence from Highway 20? Or, would be most visible from Highway 20?
There might be some subjectivity in that, I guess, in terms of how it looks, from different vantage points. Directly from Highway 20, I mean, perhaps at Pine Mountain Road, it would be fairly visible, but then once you go further east from Pine Mountain Road, there is an intermediate kind of embankment south of the highway that then shields it from view.
Then it's visible again after that, right? When you keep going east.
Yeah, if you look back, yeah. So perhaps at New Morris Road.
Coming from Burns, coming from the brothers, yeah.
Yeah, but it is, I mean, they're both set back maybe a mile from the highway in both cases, roughly. And so there's benefit there. It's not like the Riverbend landfill right off Highway 99.
I think the Moon Pit one would be only if somebody actually pulled over on the highway, knew where to look.
And the junipers there do help conceal and screen it from view.
You would see much shorter distance on Highway 20 that it would be visible as opposed to the Milliken Valley being so open, you might have visibility for miles. And about blasting, how much of the blasting at the Moon Pit would be done by the solid waste folks as opposed to by Hooker Creek? Or is that something you need to wait for their proposals?
Yeah, and we anticipate that the majority of it will be done by Hooker Creek for the recovery of aggregate for their own purposes, but again, we're waiting to see what we get back from that.
Last,
In initial discussions, but then that they would blast in advance of our work.
so the blasting at one site versus the other may not, it might be a wash. It sounds like this site is, there's no blasting.
There's no blasting, yeah.
But at Hooker Creek for solid waste folks, there may be no blasting also.
Correct, relative to, there may be some just to get the contours the way we need them. That would be outside of the scope of them needing to do their work. Again, we don't know until we see their proposal. I think there are some challenges when you have active mining, and this is a reclamation, so we have to work with the Bill Donnie, which oversees surface mining and the commercialization of rock relative to landfill operations. There's a bunch of rules around that, so we have to figure out how this would be kind of permitted and operated to make sure it's compliant with state mining regulations as well as landfill regulations. So that's going to influence who does blasting, when, and how.
Is it feasible to be able to use cover dirt from that Horse Ridge? I didn't even have that. When we first started talking, there was an older mining operation where mine basically for dirt? Could you use dirt from there for cover dirt for the moon pit operation?
I don't know. Again, I think it's a question of still county permitting and cost, but yeah, that may be an opportunity.
Our experience with importing cover material, because we had to do that here for a short period of time. It's very, very expensive. That even if your site, we were going up to Horse Butte
Oh,
to
that's
bring
a
cinders in.
good haul.
And it was, so you want to be as close to your landfill as possible with your excavation and your production of soils, So, out there across the highway, I'm sure you could use that material, but economically, whether that would make sense or
It's
not,
too far away.
yeah,
Okay.
could be. But so all I'm saying is that transportation is a big impact, so.
And in our discussions with Hooker Creek, there's discussion about what do you need and what do we need essentially, and they're different needs, and essentially for daily cover and landfill needs. Much more flexible in terms of the specification for that. Whereas, state, if they're making state spec 3/4 minus, that's very specific, and if they have excess fines, for example, that's something the landfill could use for daily cover, and so. Yeah, a lot of kind of material balance discussions, and we hope to hear more from the solicitation response on the specifics of what materials might be there, how much that they won't need, that could be used for daily cover versus, marketable materials that would need to be, used for the landfill.
We know much more about the water table at the Hooker Creek site.
We know it's very deep. I think it's roughly 900 feet, and it's beneath the hard pan of the salt, and so it's very well protected from what we have seen so far. That's how you want it under a landfill, deep and abundant, and that's what that well appears to have. Good depth and a good amount of flow.
So we are at the point, of public comment, and we'll get back into SWAC discussion. So are there any members of the public, whether it be online or here, who want to make a comment regarding what they've heard today or anything of interest?
I guess I would just comment on
And can you state your name?
I'm sorry, I'm Steve Wright.
Yeah.
The impact of Horse Ridge on the transportation of the material out to the Roth East site. That Horse Ridge is quite a climb. The impact on that, in terms of cost, I'm guessing it would be a greater cost to haul out to the east side as opposed to the moon pit side.
Yeah, I don't know the difference in distance. Is it 6 miles, 8 miles? That sounds about right. Yeah, 6 or 8 miles.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it will have an increased cost. It'll be a little bit incremental at that point. Some of the biggest costs are the loading of the transfer trailer. Getting it to ready to dispatch.
Sure.
But it will be factored in those additional costs, because they'll be coming from Redmond. Outside of Sisters, not landfill, as well as the Southwest transfer station.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, we will be factoring in that differential cost.
Does that grade factor into the cost? Rather than just all the miles being the same?
Yeah, I think that is a question that's going to be asked. Yeah, is that uphill grade is not nothing.
It's also a downhill grade, but then the trucks are empty.
At some point, there may be opportunity that there's an electrification of some kind for larger trucks that would offset some of that too.
So when you do the cost analysis, it's gonna look at not only the site itself and sort of its characteristics, but getting to and from the sites, both from a dollar perspective, but also from an environmental and greenhouse gas emissions. It's a big one of the big topics on the earlier discussion about looking locally versus long distance. So that's gonna be part of the presentation we get back.
And not sure the county's this isn't a commitment by the county, but the potential for RNG haul trucks. Based on what's generated here, and then the equipment on site could at some point be run by the electricity generated from landfill gas. It's potential, the economics might or might not work out, but potential's there. So the equations about, our projections, are subject to change, right, based on those technology changes.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do a base projection based on kind of current fuel.
Yeah, right.
Types, of course, and then. A discussion beyond that.
Well, good thing is you can always get better with alternate fuel types.
Right.
Not so much a comment as another question. Both sites seem to have 4 phases. Or maybe there was 3 at the Roth and 4 at that, and 4 at the Roth and 3 at the Moon Pit. The first phase at the Moon Pit. Anticipated timeframe on completion of that phase.
Well, if the life is 125 years, say roughly 40
40,
or
50
30 years.
for the first phase, and at the Roth effectively the same amount of time.
Oh, yeah, similar time, but really, we ought to show this as, a 5th phase on top.
Or right
Really,
at the cap.
we're gonna break it up for that, the cap grouping of cells that would then be put over it for that final height.
And with so in terms of the Roth site, you would go phase 1, 2, 3, 4, and then there would be that cap 5th. So the prominence, the ultimate prominence of the phase 1 area wouldn't occur until say around 90-year mark or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so the ultimate visibility of the Roth site, because of the lower prominence,
Mhm.
would actually not occur for
50 years.
a century or.
Right.
Okay,
And I guess with technology, this that big a site, potentially you never get to phase 5.
yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Let's divert more, shall we?
yeah.
I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, but I'm just wondering if the discussion ever came up about airborne, the dust devils that we get out in the Milliken Valley and so forth. So I'm sorry if I missed the discussion on that, but is that taken into consideration?
Yeah, so that, we're going to have to be taken into account, so it's the kind of horizontal winds out in Milliken, it seems that there may be more persistent and consistent higher wind speeds. And then there's the dirt devils which go vertical, and so, yeah, we have to think about how do we design kind of the operations to abate both of those.
Thank you.
So, now that we're zeroing in on 2 sites, have there been any more success with getting input from the tribes and engagement on the cultural side?
The tribes,
Yeah.
not at this point, so we're gonna have to do some more outreach on that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty important that they understand that we're zeroing in on these 2 locations and that they get a chance to give their input beyond just what we might get from a cultural assessment.
Yeah.
It may not come from them.
Yes, agreed.
The other thing from a wildlife perspective, I don't really recall a lot of information before. Relative to the Roth East site, I guess for both sites, I remember more discussion about the Moon Pit. And some of the eagle habitat that's nearby and that kind of stuff, but I don't really remember a whole lot of input or discussion about what the science or what, the Department of Fish and Wildlife is telling us about. At the state or federal level about how much of a corridor that area of Roth East site is or is not, and how important it is, but for me, that's something I need to be hearing about. Next spring, winter, spring.
Yeah.
And be able to talk about, comparisons of 2 sites and what the pros and cons are.
Yeah, so I'll start with, and you can talk about maybe what Tyler's saying, but we did have a meeting with Linda a few weeks back. They kind of talked a little bit about the distinction between the 2 sites that, on the Moon Pit site, it's going to be more, the concern there is going to be more human.
Access.
And the human
Proximity.
experience of, it's a wilderness for a reason.
Yeah.
And will this activity impact, what that experience is? On the Ross site, it's the ecology, particularly sage grouse. I didn't speak that much to the antelope.
Yeah, that's what I think, just to clarify, I was referring more to things beyond sage grouse, because
Yes.
we did hear about sage grouse,
Yeah.
I was thinking about other.
Yeah,
Wildlife.
and so we'll make sure. I don't know what you've heard in regards to the other.
Not as much. I mean, the permitting framework and mitigation requirements for sage grouse will be much greater than with other species, as far as we're aware. And another key distinction between the two sites is the level of development that's already occurred at Moon Pit, and as a part of the habitat quantification tool, it takes that into account. Basically, how much habitat is being disrupted. Moon Pit's largely developed already, so the habitat loss would be quantified as less, because that, the site's already developed, where your road going through. With Roth East, it's seen as all habitat, so there's that kind of quantifiable difference of habitat loss, which would require more mitigation, and several options are being looked at for mitigation. Given the extra land on the 1,700 acre parcel, only about 500 or so is being developed. The rest could be used for mitigation purposes, and there's also grazing rights related to the property that can be potentially retired as a way to mitigate for habitat loss. So there's several different options being explored.
Yeah, we are anticipating that we may get a proposal from the Ross that's aggregate of both Roth East and West, so that it would actually be a 3,500 acre parcel with opportunities for mitigation because of that. Putting all of it into conservation. So.
So mitigation, you mean ecological restoration or parks or some other thing?
Yeah, I think Roth West in particular, I think has seasonal grazing on that. What we hear on that is there are forbs that are growing on, particularly on Roth West, that so there's competing between the sage grouse for those and cattle. So.
Although if you do put a landfill there, the sage grouse may no longer be a big objective if there's a lot of predators come in. But, and then also on Moon Pit, I guess when you do look at mitigation, look at that, moving that trailhead to reduce the human interaction with the pit. You just have, because that boundary is for the many feet, didn't go quite to the present, where you could put a new little spur road in.
Yeah, so with our meeting with the BLM, there are going to be some challenge, there would be a significant challenge if we look to put a new road in.
Just a little spur.
Even a spur, any change. Right now, that right of way easement is 30 feet wide. That's it. What's that?
Oh,
Yeah.
BLM doesn't own that right away.
They own it, and they've granted a right of way to Hooker Creek.
They don't want a right way to expand.
They don't want it to expand it, would it would have to go through a whole process at a minimum of an environmental impact statement and probably a full depot. So.
Maybe, so right now the road goes up to Moon Pit. But if you put a new little, instead of going to the present trailhead, which is very close to the Moon Pit. If you just went back a little spot to the nearest point with, outside the wilderness, just to put a little 1/8 of a mile spur would require an environmental impact statement of the whole bit.
Well, that's what it appears. And so we have work to do to kind of understand both the right of way issues. It may be that for a landfill that an additional right of way would have to be granted. So
you'd have to budget.
So there's plenty that we have to work on. And I think coming back to your first comment, Mike, I think that we'll make sure that we are addressing or getting additional information around all of the habitat.
Yeah, for me, part of this, the trade-offs between places already disturbed and a place that's not disturbed and thinking about that. And so I want to understand, like, if we're gonna disturb a new place, what that means in kind of the mix of wildlife out there, and in particular, how that functions as a corridor to connect highlands, you know, in the High Mountain area with other places in and around there, you know, for deer, elk, antelope, whatever's out there, and important that might or might not be. And that's why I think it's a little different question than it's a wildlife question, but it's a little different from the sage grouse.
Yes.
Understanding what we're doing there in terms of if we're going to disturb over the medium to long term. What are we disturbing?
How much difference is the human experience out of the Badlands from an active mining operation and an active landfill operation? Are they significantly different?
Yeah, it's 10 people, you're gonna get 10 different. responses.
I'm sorry.
If you ask 10 people, you're probably gonna get at least 5 or 10 responses.
I think some of it is actual and some of it's perceived, so there's always gonna be perceived odor impacts. Whether they're actual or not, there always will be some odor, but to what degree and what mitigation, what are failing winds, all that. But you know, there's concerns over, there's going to be active equipment on the area adjacent to the Badlands, which currently all of the mining for the most part is at the far ends. So there will be some different impacts. The level of significance, I think, depends on the individual.
And it'd be mainly, I'm sorry, phase one, that would be the impacts, right?
Correct.
Once you got past phase one, it reduces, but there would be more road traffic during the phase one.
Yeah.
Period.
The Badlands are west of this site, correct?
Correct.
And prevailing winds are generally northwest or southwest. So most of the time, except when we have an easterly flow, which is fairly rare, the Badlands probably wouldn't be affected by the odor.
Right.
What's your experience been with Knott's landfill and the multitude of people that live around it? Has there been a lot of odor issue?
We would say that the odor issues are more prevalent relative to the composting operations than the landfilling operations. And we had, before we put in what's called aerated static pile processing for the organics, we had more odor complaints. They're very rare now. I think we've had one last year. So that's better management of the compost facility, the landfill. It's pretty negligible.
And the plan is to not be doing any composting at these rods.
Yeah. Sue, was there? Oh. There is a comment here from Steve. There is already a secondary trailhead access to the Badlands on Highway 20 away from the pit. Yeah. Laurel, you have a comment?
Before we lose the corner,
Okay, hold on one sec, Laurel.
well, I just wanted to, if we could come back to this removing the Highway 20 site, because you had talked about that. I guess I'm not entirely clear why it's important for us to do that now. I understand like the thinking behind it and generally the recommendation, but until we have more clarity about the future sites, I don't really know what it seems like the idea was to hold it in reserve. Let's just hold it in reserve until we are very clear about, we're going down one of these other ones. It seems that if we have to reopen the discussion again to future sites in 6 months. Let's keep something in reserve. That's part of my thinking about it.
Yeah, I would agree with mine. I have the same thought.
It just seems like it's sort of.
Yeah, I think it's, if we wanted to do any move on it this legislative session, we really probably needed to move a little while back, seeing what's going on
With Congress.
Yeah,
maybe some change.
our thought was we would just notify all the local representatives who had been reached out to originally by Commissioner Chang to say, we're not at a point where we're looking to make an ask and move forward.
Yeah.
We can do that, say that we may be coming back to in 6 months or a year from now. If it's the preference of the committee to hold it as, we haven't asked them to take action.
Right,
We just haven't told them to stand down.
I think we have a lot more information coming in January to the SWAC, so we'll have
Yeah.
a lot more details, then you can make a more educated decision.
Yeah, I had a general thought. Are you gonna leave right now?
I've got to head up to another meeting, yeah. I gotta
Because
go to a meeting.
Sort of related to this topic. I spoke with Tim. I started this the last meeting, but I had kind of two feelings over the summer. One is I think we may be shorting the taxpayer with the sites we're picking. We've eliminated the cheapest ones, possibly the Highway 97, BLM site, and I don't know, Rickard Road would be in that same category or not. But the ones that are closest or most readily accessed, we've kind of catered to destination resorts and people that have lawyers and a lot of clout and I'm not, the Milliken residents have some reason not risen to the same level as the people east of Bend, or north of Bend, but I think, I still would, if the other committee members agree, go back and keep the Highway 97 site, BLM site on the table, or just because from the taxpayer standpoint and convenience standpoint, long run, it's a lot better than any of these sites, but what I understand.
Wasn't there a fatal flaw on that site though, based on the expansion of an airport?
It was the airport.
Yeah, but that's just a guideline. The commissioners don't have to follow it. It's right at the edge of the 5 mile. That's not a legal requirement. I mean, Sage Grouse may have more clout in terms of legal type things, and we're kind of dismissing it, going ahead of the Rockies. And my other thought was what Mike expressed is we've kind of looked at the human side, and we've looked at some of the transportation and hard rock, but we haven't looked as strongly at the environmental side that we perhaps should. So anyway, but
Well, there were cost issues with some of those other sites too.
With 97?
Yeah, along 97 and to the east of 97. In terms of how much bedrock there was. Now, that wasn't investigated to the extent that we're looking at these, but that was another important reason that they weren't considered.
yeah, I wasn't there for the last meeting for that discussion, but the Highway 97 site from a cost standpoint seemed, and an environmental standpoint seemed like such a good site. I mean, they obviously had two big drawbacks, the rock and the opposition from the people around there, but the people are a fair distance away for the most part. I just thought it might be, that other committee members agreed, it might be worth asking the commissions to not take it off the table.
Did we not already officially remove that site?
We did.
Yeah, you'd have to go back
We'd
and,
have to revote on it.
Right.
So are you proposing a motion?
well, if there's only 5 of us here, if
Well, you had more on Zoom too.
if somebody else agreed, I'd propose a motion, otherwise it's no point. But yeah, I guess I'll make it a motion, see if anybody seconds it.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Okay, so I guess
Hearing none.
that's.
Yeah.
We'll forget that one.
Laurel, you had a comment? Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I would like to comment. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Laurel Collins. I'm a board member with the East Cascades Audubon Society and also the Conservation and Science Chair of the Audubon Society. I'm also a fluvial geomorphologist for the last 30 years. So I have some very deep concerns about the impacts of both the Moon Pit and Roth East sites on the greater sage grouse. Currently, there's an updated map from the SageCon landscape planning tool that's available on the web that shows a 2023 update that has core areas of greater sage grouse habitat, plus low density proposed areas surrounding those core areas. Both the Moon Pit and the Roth East site are either adjacent or very close or contiguous potentially to the boundaries of the low density extended proposed sites for protecting the sage grouse. There's been some discussion, I hear, that people maybe don't know the difference between a landfill and a mining site in terms of its impacts on sage grouse. A landfill will attract predators, particularly ravens, and ravens prey on sage grouse. East Cascades is presently very involved in trying to add protections and enhancements to greater sage grouse habitats, particularly wildflowers. The chicks depend on only wildflowers for food for the first 6 weeks of their life. And with climate change, we expect that the greater sage grouse will try to expand its habitat, potentially up in elevation into some of the areas that are on the hillsides, particularly maybe near the Moon Pit site. We know that they do nest occasionally in junipers, and we're concerned that not only the effect of increased predators around a landfill, but the noise, the traffic, and the general disturbance and effect to these potentially protected low density areas that will be decided on by the Oregon Fish and Wildlife in December 2023, that these impacts will be very significant and cause further declines on the sage grouse. I'm concerned that the Roth East site will also diminish the available vegetation and existing and remaining wildflowers. I heard that the Moon Pit site is already disturbed, but it is only disturbed in terms of the ground and the vegetation on it. It is not disturbed in terms of the effect of a landfill bringing in predators and noise and traffic. So I am concerned also that if Congress decides to remove the rider that is presently keeping the sage grouse from being listed, that in some near time in the future that the bird will be listed as threatened and endangered, and these landfill sites will be very inappropriate in terms of their adjacency to existing and possibly further protections on the sage grouse. Thank you for letting me comment.
Thank you, Laurel. Much appreciated. Are there any other comments from folks online?
No.
Thank you. Any other comments or discussion from the SWAC members? Hearing none. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Yeah, second.
We are adjourned.
You don't have the third Tuesday on the future meetings, but I assume you're gonna stick with that.
Yes.
Well,
That's. We'll get those mailed out this week. Yeah, there you go. Is that all to do?